So here we are, and we are so blessed and fortunate to have Dr. Silas Rao, who is founder of Vegan World 2026 and a major leader and inspiration for me and for most of us on this call and thousands of people beyond. And thank you so much, Silas.
Thanks a lot, Jamin. I have been talking about healing the planet and how not to go extinct over the last 2 weeks. This is the third presentation that I want to do with you. Today, appropriately, it's about social changes that need to happen. What are the social aspects of the transformation that needs to happen? If we are interested in healing the planet and taking care of our health so that we don't all die of viruses or whatever, bad things that we do to the planet. So this is the third in the series, and I'll have 4 more over the coming weeks. Social, right? We've been talking about social distancing as an appropriate response to the coronavirus pandemic. To me, this is a signal from nature saying something is not right with the way we are connecting with nature and the way we are connecting with each other. We have been given an opportunity to think about things. Isaac Newton, during the time of the bubonic plague, people were quarantined during the bubonic plague. And during the time he was quarantined, he sat there and he figured out the whole idea of calculus. We have been given something very similar now. We've asked to think about our interaction with each other, our social connections with each other, and our social connections with nature. Because social connections have to be with all of our family, not just our human family. First of all, we have to change our story so that we talk about the David that we've been creating as opposed to the mess that we're creating. We shouldn't be focusing on the mess, and we should be focusing more on the David. So imagine that Michelangelo, after finishing carving David, if you find him just trying to kill himself, and you stop him and say, "Why are you killing yourself?" And he says, "Well, look at the mess I made, pieces of marble on the floor. So how am I going to clean that up with a hammer and a chisel?" That's exactly what the situation that we find ourselves in. We have been using capitalism, and capitalism is the way in which we have been heating up the planet, and it does a great job for heating up the planet. And now with the pandemic, it's actually making capitalism look like it's not going to continue. You cannot keep growing the economy when we are all sitting at home. So we have to figure out a different way of organizing ourselves. And we have to figure out how we are going to take care of all of our sick people and how we are going to take care of all of nature, given the circumstances that we are in. It's like telling Michelangelo, no, you need to change your tools. You need to start using a bucket and a shovel to clean up. And then we can take out our cameras and start taking pictures of the David and spending lots of time enjoying the work that we have done. Because we have done something amazing as a species. We have actually created homeostasis for the planet. And now we have to change how we interact with the rest of life and with each other so that we can enjoy the fruits of our labor. Back in 2009, I was in this sanctuary in the Western Ghats of India. You can see how beautiful it is. So I took this picture from the roof of the house that we were staying in. This sanctuary used to be a coffee plantation 20 years ago. The owners basically tore down the fences and gave it back to the animals. And the animals came and did this. They just lived and the forest came back. Because the animals came and dropped new seeds and new trees were born. So every animal basically fits beautifully in this ecosystem. Because every animal implements what is known as the vitality code of nature. Receive all that you need, give all that you can, and become all that you are. Routinely, animals give more than they receive. And this is why the forest flourishes, if they just live. So I asked this owner, what did you have to do besides letting the animals live here? And she said, we had to put a fence, patrol the land, and make sure that no human being comes inside. It made it seem like human beings don't belong in nature. So the first thing that we need to do with our story is to tell a story in which we do belong in nature, exactly as we are. This is the new story that we need to tell. And once we realize that we do belong in nature, then we find our place. And we'll find how we interact with each other, how we interact with other life. So the story has to change. The story that we're telling is a story of separation. And this actually has origins in religious texts. The story of separation comes from the Old Testament. Human beings took the fruit from the knowledge tree and ate it and got banished from Eden. So we got dismissed out of nature. So that's the way we interpret this story, even though I think the story has much more profound interpretation. And I came to this more profound interpretation by a very circuitous route. I also bought into the story of separation, that I don't belong in nature. So I don't belong in my own home, which is the forest that I was looking at. And this owner was telling me that he had to keep human beings out of that forest. And they say that when the student is ready, the right teacher comes. So a year later, my granddaughter was born. And when I held her for the first time in my arms, I had the same feeling of perfection that I had at the sanctuary. And she's right here behind me now. And so she convinced me right away that we do belong exactly as we are, and that I have to find a new story in which we belong exactly as we are. So I started doing my research. And when I started doing my research, I found there is another story in the Vedas that's identical to the knowledge tree story in the Bible. It's slightly different. And this story helped me understand the story in the Bible. So let me tell you this story. It's a story of a fig tree, not an apple tree. It's also a knowledge tree, but it's a fig tree. And the way it's described in the Vedas, it is an upside down tree with its roots in the sky and its fruits on the ground. And the story begins with children playing with sticks and stones and rag dolls on the floor of their hut in the middle of the forest. And their uncle comes to visit them. And the uncle says, "Hey, why are you playing with sticks and stones
when you have a wishing tree?
When you have this wishing tree right outside your hut? Go out under the tree and wish for anything you want and it'll give it to you. Then you can be playing with real toys instead of these trifles." The children don't believe him. How can there be a tree like that? So they wait until the uncle leaves, and then they rush to the tree and they start wishing. They wish for sweets and they get them. And they gorge on the sweets and they get stomachache. They wish for toys and they get them. And they play with the toys and they get bored. Then they wish for fancier toys. And that leads to greater boredom. So there was something about this tree that the children did not understand. It grants you what you wish for, and along with it comes the exact opposite. The children didn't know that. All they knew is that they couldn't stop wishing under the tree, and the more they wished, the more miserable they were. Then they get to be young men and women, and now they're wishing for what young men and women wish for. The four main fruits of the tree were sex, fame, money, and power. And with each comes its opposite, and the result was more misery and suffering for the young men and women. Then they get to be old men and women, and they congregate under the tree in three different groups. The first group says, "You know, we were so happy when we didn't know about this tree. It has all been a hoax and a farce. It's ruined our lives. We were so happy when we didn't know about this tree." And the stories, they were fools because they hadn't understood this tree. And the second group says, "We must have been wishing for all the wrong things. I'm sure if we could go back and wish for different things, I'm sure we'd have been a lot happier." And the story says they were bigger fools, for they understood less than nothing about this tree. And the third group was the most foolish of the lot, for they come under the tree and they say, "We are so miserable, we wish you were dead." And the tree grants them the wish. And they're immediately reborn underneath the same tree, because the tree always grants wishes in dualities. Okay? The story doesn't stop there. And it talks about a lame child who was also watching all this from inside the window of the hut. He also wanted to go out and wish for a good leg so he could walk. But there was such a crowd of people under the tree, and he couldn't get through. So he stood there and he watched. And he saw how the tree was making everybody miserable. The people who were wishing were miserable. People who were trying to get to the tree were miserable. And all the animals were suffering because of all the wishing. People who were trying to get to them were suffering as well. And then he had a brilliant flash of insight. He was the only one who understood the tree. And with that understanding, he began to feel a well of compassion come from within him for all the suffering under the tree. And he lost the desire to wish. He became detached from the tree. And with that combination of compassion and detachment, he was the happiest of the lot. So that's where the story ends in the Vedas. And then in the Upanishads, where they explain to you what they taught you in the Vedas, they say that the wishing child and the watching child are inside each one of us. That's our duality. That makes it seem like if you really want to be happy, you have to stay with your watching child and observe your wishing child. In fact, the purpose of all meditation is to help us get in touch with our watching child and to observe our wishing child. So that question comes up in the Bhagavad Gita, where the explanation for this is finally revealed to us. In the Bhagavad Gita, there's a story of God talking to man. Arjuna asks Krishna, man asks God, why should I wish under this tree? You're God, so you take care of the problem. So let me just sit here and meditate upon you and I'll be perfectly happy. And God says, no, I didn't create this wishing tree so you could just stand there. How do you think I do my work? Through you. So you have to wish under the tree. And then he taught him how to wish. He said, if you go under the tree and you wish for yourself, you're going to be unhappy, just like those people who are wishing under the tree. But if you go under the tree and you wish for the benefit of everyone else, and you say, I don't want anything from this tree for myself, then you'll be perfectly happy wishing under the tree, and everyone will be happy because of your wishing. So you see, selflessness, in that sense, is the highest form of selfishness. And as a species, we should be using this tree to wish for the benefit of every other species. So far, we've been using this tree to wish for just our benefit. And that's why we have created this mess. So it also helped me understand the story in the Bible, because in the Bible, Adam and Eve got banished from Eden because they ate the apple themselves. If they had used the fruit of the knowledge tree for the benefit of other species, I'm sure we'd still be there. At least that's the story. So we'll be back in Eden when we start using our knowledge for the benefit of other species. And that is what we are asked to do now as the climate regulator species of the planet. So that's our role. So we have a role to play. The role for human beings is to be the climate regulators of planet Earth. And we have done a pretty good job on that role so far. If you look at the temperature on Earth over the last 3 million years and the CO2 levels, they've been going up and down because we have gone through so many ice ages, over 100 ice ages. And in the current interglacial period, human beings kept the temperature constant. It would have done exactly what it did 3 interglacial periods ago, except we kept the temperature constant by burning down forests and raising animals for food. So we raised the methane levels and we raised the CO2 level in the atmosphere. So those are greenhouse gases that increased and essentially kept the temperature constant for 10,000 years. And prevented the Earth from going back to another ice age 5,000 years ago. It would have done that 5,000 years ago. And so now, over the last 200 years, we have raised the temperature by another 1 degree Celsius. And in the process, we have created all the tools and technologies to understand what we have been doing. In fact, it's a good thing that we have all the scientific knowledge, so that we don't ascribe all these people dying of the coronavirus to some supernatural force. Instead, we know it's a virus. So now we can go back and figure out how to deal with it, right? So this scientific knowledge has helped us understand what we have done so far so that we can take on our true role as the thermostat species of the planet. So in this projection that Bill Rudiman did in his book, he's assuming that we'll continue doing what we're doing and basically kill ourselves off, and then the Earth will go back to another ice age a few thousand years later. So that's his projection. And I'm saying, no, we don't have to do that. We can actually bring back the forests. We can sequester all the excess carbon in the atmosphere and then keep the temperature where it was in the thermostat setting. And that will be the role of future generations of human beings. This to me is a transformation in our role from heating to cooling, which is a very drastic change. This is really like going from a caterpillar to a butterfly, from a predator role to a caretaker species. So a caterpillar is a blind consumer, just continues to consume mindlessly until it consumes so much that it cannot grow anymore. And human beings are at that stage. We cannot grow our economy anymore. And then we are forced to stop. In nature also, the caterpillar is forced to stop. Who knows what tells the caterpillar to stop? But the caterpillar stops. If the caterpillar would consume like that for 1 year, the caterpillar would have eaten the whole forest. Instead, the caterpillar stops. He builds a cocoon around himself, hangs under a twig, and meditates for a week. Inside the caterpillar, all the cells become different cells. They become imaginal cells first. And then the imaginal cells figure out what the butterfly should be. So each imaginal cell determines what part of the butterfly it's going to be and becomes that. So then when the butterfly emerges from the cocoon, the butterfly is a very discriminating consumer. It only sips nectar from flowers, and in the process pollinates the flowers and regenerates life. So we are now, because of this coronavirus pandemic, we are now being put into the cocoon. We have to think about what are we going to do. So we have created three major messes: climate change, mass extinction, and healthcare. Healthcare, if we continue with business as usual, we'll likely bankrupt by 2026. That's what Kim Williams said. But we are on track to do that today if we just let the coronavirus pandemic go out of hand. Mass extinction, if we continue with business as usual, will likely kill off all wild animals by 2026. So all these messes that we have created can be mitigated and reversed if we all adopted a compassionate vegan ethic. It can be reversed. These are the 7 core shifts that I've been talking about, and I'll go through that a little bit more in detail. Everything is making us go towards this massive transformation in human society from what we have been doing to what we need to do. And I see the coronavirus as us being thrown into a cocoon and made to think about and imagine what we will be when we come out of this. How we take care of each other, how we change our social interactions with each other, how we change our social interactions with animals so that we can minimize the pandemics coming to us. Right now, we are getting a pandemic once every 100 years, let's say, and we are getting new diseases from the animals once every few years because we are killing over 1 trillion animals. So we are constantly interacting with them. In a vegan world, we will minimize our interaction with them. So imagine that we reduce our interaction by a factor of 100. So instead of a pandemic once every 100 years, we'll get a pandemic once every 10,000 years. And that becomes much more manageable. This is a homework assignment that we have during our quarantine period, figuring out what a vegan world would look like. So imagining the transformation that needs to happen. And I think we have to work on this new Aquarius app so that people, when they use it, will start thinking differently from the way they're used to thinking. And we have to implement the Vitality Code among us consciously so that each of us become all that we are, receive all that we need, and give all that we can. And when we implement this consciously, I bet you that each one of us will be giving more than we receive. Each of us become an asset to nature. So here are the detailed social shifts from carnism and speciesism to veganism, from colonialism to decolonization, from sexism and heterosexism to gender equality and justice. So the new game that we build has to have everything on the right-hand side, has to implement it automatically. From racism to racial equality, from rising inequity to radical equality, from individualistic to community-oriented, from competition to collaboration. So in fact, all our games have to become collaborative games as opposed to competitive games. And in fact, I play speed with my granddaughter. Speed is normally a competitive game as to who finishes first. In our case, we are figuring out the cards in each of our hands and figuring out who should put first in order to maximize what we are putting together. It's a very collaborative speed game, right? From hierarchical to cooperative and consensual, from secrecy and lies to openness and truth, from endless war to durable peace. And this is forcing us to do that. All of us around the world have to come together to figure out how to solve this pandemic. From selfishness and greed to selflessness and contentment, from exclusivity to radical inclusion, from domination control relating to partnership respect relating. So all of our relationships have to change. You can see that this is a completely different sociology that we are creating. From individual transparency and institutional privacy to individual privacy and institutional transparency, the exact opposite of what we're doing today. From normalized violence to normalized non-violence. And our education system, right now, it's creating bureaucratic administrators for the empire. That's the job of the education system right now. And instead, we should be creating climate healers, well versed in how to deal with the climate, how to take on our role as the thermostat species of the planet. A couple of years ago, we came up with a whole list of questions. In fact, we had 2 boards filled with social questions. on transition, and here are some of them. How do we end toxic masculinity? We have a study group for that. Even though it's not been active, but I think we need to activate all these study groups now. You need to start answering these questions, creating recommendations for people. This is the time in which we want to get active on creating a specification for a vegan world, a visioning exercise from people around the world getting together and visioning out what a vegan world would look like. That includes answering all of these questions. How do we end toxic masculinity? We started that study, but it has to end at a point where we have a recommendation for how do we deal with this. Unifying Vegan Study Group, we also had a study group active on this. Here are the new model questions that we came up with. And you can see, each of these questions have to be answered. We have to figure out how to do these things. How do we deal with animals eating crops and gardens? How do we transition to a culture of normalized nonviolence? All of these are questions that have to be answered. Do we have to have prisons in the world? How do we deal with people who are not playing by the rules? What are the rules? There is a lot of work to be done, and I invite all of you to join the Vegan World 2026 project. We'll be having a lot more focused summits in the future. It's an interview per day. And then we also have a health conference happening in April. So we want to create conferences now around each of these topics. I want to invite people who have been studying these topics to come and tell us how can we make this transformation happen from where we are to a vegan world. And then start writing out the specifications for this. So thank you very much. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Beautiful.
I have a question. Hi. Thank you for the presentation, Dr. Rao. I just read this morning an article from this guy, Carter. He's a vegan. He writes for the Sentient Media. You were going to meet up with him because he has similar views.
Mm-hmm.
This morning, he sent this thing called Farming for the Planet.
Uh-huh.
So it's brand new, but it's an ongoing topic that he's very interested in, and so am I. In the last paragraph, he's saying, telling people what to eat has rarely been successful endeavor. Instead, what does work is shifting infrastructure.
Right.
Biking in Copenhagen didn't happen out of the blue. It was a design.
Right.
I would like to ask you about how to connect this to what we need to do and to the game that you're presenting. What is the new game in relation to this design of the infrastructure of the world that your granddaughter is going to inherit?
Yeah, we have to explain to people that these pandemics that we are getting are zoonotic diseases. They're coming from our interaction with animals. It makes no sense for us to continue with the same interaction with animals while trying to address the pandemic. If people are quarantined and our government is sending us food, why is the government sending us animal foods? Didn't someone have to go and interact with animals again? Do exactly the same stupid thing that caused us the problem in the first place? We have to reach a point where we have to be open about it. We have to be transparent about what is really the cause of it. So far, no one is talking about what caused this pandemic to happen. Then you can tell people, look, this is why we are giving you vegan food. This is why we have to create an infrastructure for vegan food. Also because the main risk factors for mortality for this pandemic are chronic diseases like diabetes, heart disease. All of those can be reversed if we just give people good food. In every way you look at it, it makes sense for our so-called experts and our scientists to talk about this, to be open about this, and to tell people why they're only getting vegan food now. Someone is giving you food. Why should they interact with animals? It makes no sense anymore. But we only reach that point when we are transparent about what is really happening. We have to tell the truth. So far, we have been invoking all these zoonotic diseases and then figuring out vaccines for them. That's been our mode of operation. We've gotten away with it for a long time. Looks like it's getting worse and worse. We're not going to get away with it for too long. This particular pandemic is a game changer because it is projected to infect 40 to 70% of the people. If it has a mortality rate of 3% or anything close to that, literally the human population is going to come down at the end of this year.
I agree with everything you have said. Dot put an article and a quote on the chat box that it says globally 73% of all antimicrobials sold on earth are used in animal raised for food, which is also supporting your arguments, Dr. Rao.
Right.
My point is, what is our focus on the pathways to build this infrastructure? How are vegans lobbying power or the financial power or the cultural power to change this infrastructure, to make it easy for people to get this whole food, plant-based vegan food
Right.
as cheap as a burger in Burger King, but not GMO Impossible Burger, right?
We have to have a conversation with the majority. We have to have a conversation about laying it out, telling them, look, tell us why we are wrong when we tell you that this is where it came from. And why are we still subsidizing animal foods, which is the root cause of all of these diseases that we're getting? Why are we still subsidizing the killing of animals? When you quarantine people, maybe government should give out vegan food for free. And if people really want to eat meat, they have to pay for it. Okay? It should be reversed. There is a strong reason to do that. You're trying to reduce your medical costs. Otherwise, you're going to go bankrupt. See, we always operated on the assumption when the pie is bigger, there is more for everybody. This is what Dr. McDougall told me. He's written about it. When he goes to insurance companies and he tells them, look, if you just educate people to eat whole food plant-based diet, then you will save this $90,000 you're paying for heart procedure or complications from diabetes. Even if it costs you $9,000 to educate the customer, you're saving $90,000. Isn't that a great win-win for everybody? And the insurance company told him, no, it's not. So we get a bigger portion when the pie is big. When people are getting all these heart procedures, we have a huge healthcare system. And so we get a portion of that, 40% of that, whatever it is. That's the problem we face because it's a very systemic issue, the game that we are playing. And now the entire game is going to go wacko because we don't have the money. If 40% of the people contract this disease and 20% of them have to be intubated, breathing apparatus and all kinds of things to help them, we don't have the infrastructure for it. It's up to us. Let's do everything we can to minimize how many people have to get to that critical stage. Within 1 month, you can reverse diabetes. You can reverse heart disease. Within 1 month, if people are getting the right foods. So it makes sense for us to do that so that we have less complicated infections that we have to deal with.
Beautiful. Thank you. Myra has her hand raised. Great to see you, Myra. Welcome. Take it away, Myra.
Hi, everybody. Good to see you all. We are in a very interesting part of life as of right now. What makes me very happy and very peaceful, even though everything seems to be chaotic, is the fact that coronavirus, one way or another, bring consciousness for people. Sharing with people, our loved ones, or social media, what we know, to stop eating meat, wild animals, domestic animals. Our bodies are not meant for that. For instance, we know that H1N1, HIV, SARS, all these viruses have been a cause of consuming meat and dairy. The more dairy you eat, the more cheese, the more yogurt, your body builds more mucus. This makes it easier for any type of bacteria or virus to come to your body and to stay there alive for a longer period of time. What is this coronavirus telling us? What is life telling us of right now?
Yeah, and the good news is because of the cancellation of all sports events, I was invited to talk for an hour on some mainstream radio station in Long Island about the coronavirus. It's supposed to be an NBA commentary slot.
And Silas, I really loved this homework assignment that we're all been given.
Right.
We're all like inside this caterpillar cocoon. Since we can't go out and interact in public now in gatherings, the way to gather is here in this virtual world, which a lot of us are finding gives a lot more clarity because it's simplified. It's just pure connection. We're connecting with our minds and our hearts and our words, and we don't worry about logistics.
Right.
I have to go there to see you and drive my car, and then I can only stay for so long because then I have to go someplace else. You ain't going anywhere.
No, we've been given the tools to do our job. This is the best use of our time. set of specifications for a vegan world. Let's vision it and then figure out how to implement that as we come out of this cocoon. I like to tell the story that Mother Nature is benevolent. She is giving us slightly worse. Are you going to learn? It's not a pandemic that's going to kill all of us. She's gently waking us up, saying, learn. For the temperature to stabilize and for the earth to have homeostasis, we need to be around. We can do a lot of good for the planet. Once we recognize that we have also done something that was good, even though we didn't realize it.
Especially with this coronavirus going on, I think that was a big step towards the vegan world 2026, maybe even before 2026.
Yeah, it definitely is bringing us all together. We are not thinking about war with Iran and things like that anymore. We're talking about how do we help them? How do we help each other get out of this mess that we are in? It has the potential to bring us together as humanity and then help us become better stewards of the planet.
Please, people, stop buying toilet paper and just buy yourself fruits and vegetables, rice and beans.
Now, there's always that instinct to hoard and be sure, but I don't know why the priority is towards toilet paper.
I wish I had a corporation that produced toilet paper.
If you think about it, the entire economic system is being called into question. You cannot grow anymore. How can they grow the economy beyond what it already is? We're going to be seeing a lot of revenue shrinkage across the board. People don't drive as much, so which means the mechanics are not working as much. Because I'm not going to be taking the car out for my oil change for 2 months now instead of 1 month. You see these ripple effects throughout the economy. So the entire old way of doing things is being called into question. I think this is a game changer.
It is. And we needed that. I don't know what's the consequence going to be with Mexico.
I don't know about the exchange rate today, but yeah, it has been going up like crazy. This is a sign that the economic system is a complete joke. It's already collapsed. It's completely non-scientific how it moves up and down. It doesn't have to do anything with the local needs and cultures of the people. So I don't pay much attention to that unless I need to.
Silas, I really like what we were talking about earlier about the example of Denmark that made it easy for people to adopt bicycling, and then it became a part of the culture. I think now with the coronavirus and learning from the example of China that let people stay in their homes and bring the food to them so they don't have to go out into the markets and shops and all that, I think we have an opportunity here to create a system where we deliver healthy vegan food to anyone who needs it. We just go and do the deliveries and form a volunteer corps. I think once we start it, it'll become very popular. Of course, that's going to require a whole set of controls and everything, making sure that the people who are making the food don't have the coronavirus, the people who are distributing it, et cetera, protect themselves, leave the food on the doorstep, don't open the door, wait till the person has gone, then get your food, et cetera. Systems for washing the reusable containers and all that. This can be an impetus for leading that transformation. We're certainly not going to be distributing meat for a whole host of reasons. We can simultaneously take out the coronavirus and end world hunger by organizing ourselves this way. We have super abundance of food. It's just that we're feeding it to these miserable animals born into captivity, who are raised only to be killed and eaten. Your thoughts on that, Silas?
That's exactly what I see happening. We need to do this. When people are stuck inside closed doors and you don't want them to come out, they have to eat. So in China, they were bringing food. And I don't know what kind of food they were bringing, but I would be shocked if they were bringing meat and, wild meat, especially bat soup and things like that. That would be foolishness because you're inviting the same catastrophe again every time. This is forcing us to rethink who we are as a species and as a society. If we don't take care of the homeless or the people who are sick, they're going to infect all of us. It's in a way asking us a question as to who are we as a society? Are we willing to take care of the least among us? Because if we do, then you take care of all of us. Because otherwise, that one person can go around infecting lots of others and spreads. It's either Medicare for all or coronavirus for all. That's the options we have. And it's food for all. We have to give them good food.
Hello, everybody. I'll just quickly interject. If you go to 60 Minutes Australia, there's an excellent undercover report on what they call the wet markets, where many wild animals from all over the world are slaughtered, but It's not just these wet markets, it's the whole industrial animal agriculture and dairy industry who has to cease operations. Last week at this time, I gave Dr. Joe Vipond, who is president-elect of the Canadian Association of Physicians for the Environment. Unfortunately, I've not heard anything back from him. Rather disappointing that's taking so long, but we need to put pressure on physicians because the health consequences of this are so serious. I would think that somebody could actually say there's grounds for malpractice. Any thoughts on that?
Absolutely, you're right. I think we need to file a malpractice action against the American Medical Association for not talking about this. This has to be front and center in the discussion. This is preventing any future pandemics. It's actually a veganism, right? Because anytime someone buys an animal product, it triggers a series of events that leads to another human being exploiting another animal for the replacement product. And that interaction could be the cause of the next pandemic. So who knows? This is why you need to minimize these things. You need to leave them alone. These animals have to live their own lives without being constantly corralled and killed. Even domestic animals that we feed all these antibiotics to. So they are breeding viruses and bacteria that are immune to those antibiotics, which means we don't even have a defense if something jumps across the species barrier. We constantly have people going around slashing their throats in factories. So it's not just the wet markets in Asia, it's all the markets. H1N1, swine flu, they came from regular markets, these so-called non-wet markets. Unfortunately, by focusing just on the wet markets, we are trying to portray it as a Chinese problem. It's not a Chinese problem, it's a worldwide issue. It's all of us. We are all complicit in this. So the entire system has to change. But I think the more of us ask questions of our doctors, and say, why are we not talking about this? We can raise the temperature on this.
I think we've got such a solid foundation here. Silas, I don't know what you think about having a little brainstorm session about the steps that we're going to need to take to go to this food distribution system, because it seems we're at a very critical moment. And obviously, those of us who can have stockpiled what we can of food and other vital supplies. But think about the percentage of the United States that lives from paycheck to paycheck with businesses closing. These people are even losing their paychecks. And so now they're left with doubly nothing. What are they all supposed to do? Go out and rob rich people's homes? Rob businesses that have closed their doors? Go out and panhandle? Well, no one's walking around on the streets to give out change. We need to figure this out quickly. Love to brainstorm with Silas.
This is exactly what it's for, Jamin. I mean, your brainstorming is right on point. You're talking about practical solutions right now, for what's happening on the ground. What I'm offering here is, when we get out of it, how do we organize ourselves differently? How do we organize ourselves now, differently, so that we start thinking about all of this put together. It's not just one single thing that we need to address. It's a complete system transformation. I want all of us to imagine that we are in a cocoon, that we are the imaginal cells, and that we are now trying to figure out how to create a butterfly out of us, out of what has happened now. So we have to imagine the butterfly. We have to vision the butterfly and then play our part in it. I mean, all restaurants are closing down. There's no point in giving them loans, because that's like a temporary fix that you're doing. This virus is with us. It's going to be with us for a long time. Just like influenza, you have another one that comes along. That's the reading I get from the infectious disease experts. So that being the case, I think we need to take this thing much more seriously than patchwork solutions. Yeah, chilies on wheels. Vegan chili for people in need of a warm meal. That's an amazing idea. Imagine taking these people who work in these restaurants and turning them into people who provide these meals, funded by local governments or people who have wealth. At least in the current system, you can take the wealth that you collected and use it for this larger purpose and help create the new system that's going to come out of this. And eventually, I think we have to have our own currency for these things. We have to have our own currency for the vegan world anyway, and a different way of distributing resources around. This is also a time for us to say all nations are in this together. So it's no longer rich nation, poor nation dichotomies. People in poor nations cannot handle the epidemic. They're going to come and infect all of us eventually. So you better go and solve it for them too.
Absolutely. I'm sort of envisioning a system where 90% of people just stay home. The 10% who don't are in these vital sectors like agriculture, like trucking, distribution, restaurants, as you just mentioned, Silas. And in fact, their business should grow, right? Because now suddenly everybody needs their product delivered. So we need more delivery people. My thoughts go all the way from the big system macro planning of all this, all the way down to the very local. I'm sort of a bottom-up thinker. Well, I like to do both, actually. But from the bottom-up perspective, here on Whidbey Island, I would love to organize a whole channel, a whole video conference and series of meetings on that channel, specifically around getting Whidbey Island fed and starting to pioneer this and pilot it. And then if other groups would start in different parts of the world, we can all come together and share, just like we're doing here at the Block Party, and figure out best practices and how do we test people to make sure, do they have the virus, do they not? If they don't, okay, great. How do we keep them from getting the virus while doing their job? And Silas, as an accomplished engineer, you can certainly appreciate the need for mapping this all out, having metrics and measurements at every stage. We need to apply our collective intelligence to designing this system, piloting it, getting the word out, inviting the rest of the world to participate. And I think this will become a heck of a story because it'll just be such a positive, feel-good story that the media, I think, will love to cover. We need some good news after so much bad news.
Yeah, we are not too far from that in this country. The governor of Ohio had a news conference where he said that his public health people are saying that around 100,000 Ohioans are already infected. And the only reason we think the numbers are low is because we are not testing them. So our test system is completely botched. If that's the case, we are going to be in quarantine very quickly. When we find out how many are infected, we are going to try and spread it as slowly as possible. Otherwise, our healthcare system is going to be swamped. That's the reason for social distancing. We know that we're going to get it. We just want to get it 6 months down the road, maybe a year down the road, not immediately, so that we don't flood the hospital system.
All right, Dot has put in the chat names of a couple of groups, Chili on Wheels, and she's put a link to their organization, and then Food Not Bombs.
Right. Food Not Bombs, I know they feed the homeless, anyone who comes, but they do it once a week. And these are volunteers who are doing it in the present system. But we are looking at something much more organized, feeding the whole community, making sure that it is healthy, nutritious food. We can have Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine. PCRM tell us what kind of food should be cooked. Doctors who are promoting a whole food plant-based diet. In fact, one of the best meals that I ever had was at a PCRM banquet. And it was completely whole foods plant-based. And they get thousands of doctors coming and attending. And it was an awesome meal. PCRM also works on moving away from animal models for any kind of testing. There are more accurate models based on software and chemical models that work better than sticking it into an animal. We need to get away from all of those unnecessary interactions with animals.
What's it going to take to help restaurants to take the lead on this and start to pioneer it? If I were a restaurant owner, I would think long-term here. I'd say, okay, what do we need to do to make it in the short term? And then how do we go to longer term? First of all, from a marketing standpoint, in whatever community, if you're a restaurant and you take the lead and you're on the news and everyone's talking about how you're feeding the community, guess what? When this chapter is over, and people are going out to eat again, where do you think they're going to want to go? Your place. Furthermore, this is a way to not go bankrupt. If you're able to keep your employees paid and your business running, then you don't have to go bankrupt. You don't have to shut down. And there will be support. I guarantee it. There will be support. I think what I'm putting the call out for is restaurants willing to take the lead and start to pioneer. And it's delicate because we need to have safety as just a built-in part of it. For the folks who do the deliveries, they need to wear some form of a hazmat, certainly a mask, gloves, etc., and procedures for delivering the food. If we're going to use reusable containers, maybe we don't solve all these problems at once. The most urgent is to get people fed by whatever means and pioneer this.
Yeah, I can imagine this happening in Arizona State University. ASU has now closed down. They're only holding classes online. The city of Tempe is now pretty much on lockdown. You can't have people coming to cafeterias anymore, which means food has to go to them. So we should be talking about this. We should be figuring out how to do this. There are vegan restaurants that I can get involved implementing this idea in Tempe. The vice mayor happens to be vegan in Tempe.
Awesome. Awesome. Let's definitely block out some time for next week's block party. And let's invite restaurant owners, food distributors, farmers. My feeling is build it and they will come. Let's start with seeding the world with a few examples that are working. Celebrate those models, propagate those, create this online community so that any community can bring together their restaurateurs, their food distributors, their bakeries, etc. And then I think the funding will have to come. We will figure it out, whether it's using the Ahimsa currency or a new currency or old money for a while, whatever it takes. This is just such a profound moment where we can make this shift from caterpillar to butterfly, starting with the most basic needs. See, if we start with food and water, for that matter, start with these most basic problems, then using the same distribution network, we can do medical supplies, medicines, even services brought to specific locales. I just see the benefits for this collective intelligence expanding, because to be a part of it, to participate in this, even to receive food, it helps very much if you get online and make yourself known. This is how many people are in our household. This is where we are, and we don't want to have to leave the house, but of course we will if we need to go out and get food somehow, etc. And of course, identify those neighborhoods that are most high risk, be very proactive, literally put leaflets on the doors. Here we are, here's how to get in touch with us. We will be back. So even if you have no phone service, no way of communicating, we will be back. And here's when we'll be back. And we will have food if you need it. Maybe even fill out this little checkbox survey and leave it on your door. We have to consider all cases, elders who have no internet access, etc. Just start this massive outreach. It seems to me also, since Seattle was the first American city to kind of take the lead with the problem, let Seattle take the lead with the solution. We live north of Seattle on Whidbey Island. Right. I'd like to start something here, which is much smaller population. There's a lot of wealthy people on the island who could support this. There's already some local food systems that can be built upon. Wherever we start, let's make Seattle the case study in how to feed an entire city safely and keep people quarantined.
Right. No, that's a great idea. Governor of Washington will also be very much on board once you explain why it has to be like this. It cannot be burgers being sent out to people. That's asking for more of the same problem.
Yeah, and also it's burning through way more grain that could go straight into people's stomachs, much more food and calories to meet the needs of such a large population. And also for food safety, for spoilage, etc. For all these reasons, all the signs are pointing towards veganism. Like with that chili on wheels, we just need to find out the most sensible way of distributing that food. Again, I'm all about reusable, but then in this context, how do we do that? Well, look, if people are going with hazmat suits to drop off clean food, maybe an even more hazmat protected team could go around and take the dirty containers for industrial cleaning and reuse.
Right.
I just don't like the idea of all this single-use stuff getting thrown out. But again, if we have to start with that, let's start with that. If we don't meet people's nutritional needs, it's going to be utter chaos and a lot more crime, a lot more theft, and a lot more spread of disease in the process. Dot writes, with chili, you could just pour them in jars. Yeah, definitely. In fact, that's a really interesting thought, Dot. People who want to be refilled, leave your clean, empty container on your porch, and we pour it in there. That's a very interesting thought. I like that, Dot.
We could also go for green slime.
Yeah, green slime is a code word that Nolan and I use. We make these big vegan smoothies with all kinds of cool ingredients, and it ends up looking like this green slime. So, yeah, green slime, there's all your veggies. We got 15 different vegetables in this delicious smoothie, fruits and vegetables and nuts and seeds and all that good stuff, and then have a really hearty stew to complement that. Barley, beans, corn and rice and beans make complete protein. Right. Start buying industrial quantities of these ingredients, get the right restaurant involved, and start doing it.
Right. Especially with the schools being shut, a lot of kids get their only good meal at school. who won't be getting that. So it's absolutely imperative that we do this.
Absolutely. So I'll tell you what, here's some homework to everyone who's willing. Contact local food-related businesses and food-related government offices, social services, food stamps, grocery stores, food distributors, basically anyone and everyone who's related to food, anywhere in the world, whether this is Ireland, England, Indonesia. Join us because we can all learn from each other. We can figure out where do we start and how do we start and care for everyone in the process.
Sounds good.
There's hot food, but then there could also be packets of food that could be prepared at home, as long as they have running water and electricity, which is a big if, right? Some places are going to be lacking that too. So we need to be prepared. We can think in terms of both models, prepared food and food that's not yet prepared, like these packets that are put together and then shipped off to places in need. With packets, we could deliver more food in a single drop and then come back once a week instead of every couple days or so. Beans and rice are the basis. You get your calories and you get your protein and a fair amount of vitamins depending on the mix of beans, a basic starting point.
My granddaughter actually likes minestrone soup, which is similar.
Yeah, exactly.
Pasta and beans.
And vegetables, yeah, minestrone.
Look at the other vegetables.
Yeah.
Stephanie in Ireland wrote, "This is also a blessing in disguise for collective intelligence. If we managed to brainstorm and implement ideas to cure coronavirus parallel to other talks, while people are on lockdown and on alert and have time to view you, you would definitely have their attention for SRM and other great ideas." Yeah, I had exactly the same thought, Stephanie. This is forcing us all to come together online, which is the perfect place to manifest collective superintelligence. Any meeting of people in person is collective intelligence, but collective superintelligence is where we create this whole planetary network of conversations and facilitate lane changing between topics, discovery of groups and conversations that you had no idea are out there and you can just jump into because they're open to the public, etc. This is where the imaginal cells come to imagine together.
Right.
I'm thinking of a restaurant nearby here. It's called Nosh here on the south end of Whidbey Island, and they make really nice vegan noodle dishes that go into these cardboard Asian food containers. That's the perfect kind of meal that we could produce in high volume, put in those containers and get them out. I think we just need to start, because once we start, it'll be a story. Once it's a story, people will fall in to support and participate.
Right.
It definitely looks like the story is already picking up with food delivery services like Uber Eats, DoorDash, Postmates that have existed for a while. Very active in Seattle for sure. Maybe there's an opportunity there because they already have the infrastructure and the network set up.
Absolutely. Uber Eats, go from this restaurant to this one customer and then off to the next restaurant. So it's kind of very point to point. We need to convert that into a more of a volume operation where instead of a tiny little compact card delivering one meal at a time, it's a van or a truck carrying a whole bunch of food and making multiple stops. I'm even thinking from some logistics work I did years ago that we could have a truck coming from a restaurant or a factory drop off a whole bunch of meals in a given neighborhood to a person in that neighborhood whose job it is then to distribute it to all the houses in that neighborhood or apartments or units or whatever. I think there's a lot of creative work that's pending to be done here. But then also the homeless populations, as was pointed out. We need to get the food to them before they're out on the streets coughing and shaking down people for money or food or whatever, opening restaurant doors. Got any spare food, please? Right? Panhandling is quickly becoming totally unviable as a way of getting by. They're the ones with the least amount of buffer. So let's start there and then work our way through the poor neighborhoods and eventually get everyone. But we got to figure out where to start and how to really make this a revolutionary new thing. And speaking of homeless communities, my goodness, what a great opportunity there to build community, start meeting their basic needs right where they are. And then, of course, we've got all these schools that are closed with all their classrooms and doors and multiple rooms and everything. Let's move people into those schools for medium-term shelters. They're going to be closed for months. Great. We've got places to house people in relatively isolated conditions. We can even use the school kitchen to prepare food and deliver it. There could be whole buildings for people who are sick who need to be quarantined, as well as whole buildings for people who are not sick who need to be isolated from the people who are sick. So there's
Right.
this whole redesign of society that we urgently need to embark upon. And how else are we going to do that other than with collective intelligence? I don't imagine that Donald Trump in that speech that he just gave to the nation has all the details there. We need to work it out ourselves. Obviously, the government's going to do a lot, but we can even tell the government, look, here's the whole solution and here's what we need you to do, rather than waiting for them to tell us what we need to do.
Yeah.
Hey, Jorge over here. If people are wondering what will bankrupt the USA medical system first, if the coronavirus or the eating animal food, the answer would be they're the same, right? As a marketer, I would think about ways to make this swallowable to most people because they don't want to get blamed what they eat in the middle of a crisis. I see all the sick people around me. I'm scared that it will affect me. And all of a sudden, I am to blame. I don't know if marketing-wise that would be a success.
Yeah, I don't think we should frame it as people are to blame. It's systems in place that are promoting this, subsidizing this. We cannot have a system that is promoting it and then blame the people for following the system.
I agree with part of that, but in my perception, the system is alive because of us. Like we feed it with a lack of awareness. To blame the system doesn't create the link of our responsibility of it. It's a tough task. I don't have an answer.
This is why I use the caterpillar analogy. Without going through the caterpillar phase, there is no butterfly. So whatever we have done so far is necessary for us to become the butterfly. If we didn't have the scientific knowledge, we would be blaming some supernatural power for killing these old people. We don't know that it's a virus that's causing this. It's necessary that we went through this phase to get to where we need to go. We need to spread the positive story, the story of the thermostat species. We have been part of nature forever. We were never out. Nature has always been our guide. She's now guiding us through this little tiny virus to become the butterfly. Because that is a story in which we are surrendering to the larger intelligence. We're being puppeted. In that kind of story, we don't have to blame anyone. It's a story of the transformation that has to happen.
I really love this energy that I feel right now connected by Zoom, by your words, and by the energy you project. This is not a seller in the media. Spiritual atmosphere is a ranking failure in the media. So that tells us about how the media needs to change, but it will change because of us.
Thank you. Thank you. The analogy of the caterpillar and the butterfly has been around since the 70s. There was an earlier book that talked about that, and I used that analogy in my Carbon Dharma book in 2011. And I had no idea at that point that we are literally going to be in a cocoon, which is what this virus is doing. We are literally going to be marinating in a cocoon, thinking about becoming an imaginal self, doing this online gathering, trying to figure out and vision out the vegan world that we're going to be in. It's amazing to me to watch this unfold. I had no idea it would be a little virus that would do this, but around the world it is doing it. So this is nature at work. We are just taken along for the ride. She wanted homeostasis for herself and she's getting it. She's making it happen. And all along, we had no idea that we were heating up the earth, preventing the next ice age from happening. I'm beginning to trust the larger process, trust nature at play, and say, how can I help as this instrument?
Channels. Right. Kamaya, great to see you. How are you?
Good.
Wonderful. Good to see you. And what do you think about all this that's going on, Kamaya, if I may?
Well, I don't know what you guys are talking about, so, well.
We're talking about a vegan world and how to create a vegan world. We're imagining that now. So you're turning the caterpillar into the butterfly.
Oh, why not that story?
Yeah.
I'm very grateful of how you guys are working so hard to make this happen. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's really your generation is making us do it. Because the virus doesn't affect kids below the age of 15. That's what I heard.
I'm under 15, so who cares? I'm not going to get the virus.
No, you get it, but you don't get affected by it. That's all.
The thing is, Kamaya, all of us, grown-ups and children, elders, babies, it's affecting all of us. So we're all coming together to say, what do we need to do? How do we need to work together in whole new ways? How do we need to transform our whole society, right? Now pretty much everyone's at home. Well, how do we grow food and distribute food and make sure everyone has enough to eat?
Just grow it in your backyard.
Exactly.
Go to your school and grow food and then bring it back.
Simple as that. Well, here's the thing, Kamaya. It may take months for that food to produce. What do you eat in the months in between now and then? I love what you're saying, Kamaya. This is exactly the conversation we're having. What do we need to do? And I think we need you here in this conversation.
Right.
Hey, Kamaya, it's so nice to see you. I miss your face and love to see your hair.
Thank you.
So,
Yeah.
I want to share with you, Kamaya, that good friends of mine, they are originally from Syria. They came here to United States 5 years ago because in Syria there's a lot of war and the situation over there has been awful for a lot of years. It was amazing to see that in their backyard, they have a huge garden. It's beautiful. It's full of flowers, full of vegetables and fruits, strawberries. And I was thinking to myself, oh my gosh, these people that came from Syria 5 years ago, they are contributing more to heal Mother Earth than myself because I don't have a garden. I really need to start working into building my own garden. And you know what? She pulled some beets.
I grow beets.
Oh, you do?
I
Oh my
pull.
God, you're going to have to share some with me.
But they're golden beets.
Yeah, the ones that she gave me, those are the red ones.
Yeah.
I'm thinking that it is very important to start making our own gardens because we are going to definitely have more nutrient quality if we do this by ourselves.
It's really more easier when you have a garden bed because they grow more faster in garden beds than usual.
Yes.
We have tons of vegetables and fruits in our garden. But I just keep picking my beets because they're delicious. They're actually one of the sweetest things I've ever tasted. And I've tasted really sweet things.
Wow.
And they were so ripe and juicy, I felt like my whole mouth was going to turn yellow. Literally.
Kimaya, this is Jorge from Mexico. I'm very happy to hear you talk about eating fruits and veggies the way you do. Really inspiring.
We have to leave soon. Thank you all very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Stay safe.
Thank you.
Thank you both. Great.
Bye.
To see you.
Bye.